And three, two, one. Hello and welcome on back, folks, to another edition of A Humanistic Perspective. It's an early morning, but we got another amazing episode on the docket for you today. I can't wait to get into this week's episode, and let me share a little information on my guest today. My guest today is a nomadic traveler living in an RV, experiencing the open world, just living freely. He's an artist. He's a creator. He's a photographer. He's a man and a thinker. And I'm so pleased today to be joined with John Noltner. John, thank you for joining me today.
Chad, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and so we were talking a little bit beforehand. So how has life been recently? Catch me up. Give me a little update. So you're living in an RV. How did you even get there? And how's COVID been for you recently?
Oh man, that's so many interesting questions. Life in an RV is great. My wife and I decided to sell our house in the middle of a pandemic where we'd lived for 20 years and raised our family. We figured out, we've been on the road now for about a year.
Okay.
We decided that we could live and quarantine in a pandemic just as well in a trailer as we could in a house.
Sure.
We were done mowing lawns. We didn't have any need for that many square feet anymore, and we wanted to change.
Did you have a lot of kids too?
We had two kids. We had Jordan is 26 now, and Brenna is 23, and so they're sort of off doing their own thing. And we were just ready for something new. You know, pre-pandemic, this project that we're going to be talking about, A Piece of My Mind, had kept me on the road a lot. So in 2019, I think Karen and I were apart from one another for 180 days that year. And that's not why we got married. You know, we kind of like each other and we wanted to be together. So we had decided that we were going to do this RV thing and go from programming to programming. As I move exhibits and do workshops across the country, she was going to quit her job. We are going to live in the RV so we could do that. Well, of course, the pandemic canceled all of that programming. When you do public programming and the public can't gather, you know, it all goes away.
Yeah, it kind of makes it difficult.
Yeah, so we had to scratch our heads a little bit and wonder how this was going to work. But eventually we just decided to use this time instead of going from programming to just travel around and gather new stories, to find people who were looking for creative solutions to some of our most challenging social issues. And so that's what we've been doing for the last year. We've driven 50,000 miles across the country. So not the most efficient route, but, you know, talking to people who are finding creative ways to bridge divides and build community.
That is beautiful. And I want to get into A Piece of My Mind in just a second, but I want to get back into maybe a little bit of your childhood. And was this spontaneity that came out in this RV trip later, was that always a part of your life? Give me a little bit of the backstory. Where did you grow up from? And sort of how did we get here now?
Yeah, it's interesting. You can't always see those arcs happening when you're in the midst of them, but when you look back, it makes sense. Sure. And I was an awkward kid growing up, as many of us are. I was really fascinated with music. I really loved photography. Never quite understood where I fit in. I think I had a lot of friends.
Were your parents creative?
No. Well, in different ways, right?
Sure, right.
In the traditional arts sense, no. My mom was an educator and my dad was a social worker. And so this sense of the common good was always present in their lives, but they lived, you know, a middle class sort of standard conservative, and I don't mean politically conservative, but sort of modest lifestyle.
Yeah, traditional American dream. Let's get a house, let's establish a family type stuff.
Yeah, a little rambler. You work the same job because they're paying you a paycheck, and nothing fancy. But when I was young, about 9 years old, we started spending our summers traveling. We had a little pop-up camper, and we would go to national parks. My dad hated cities. Nice. And so we would just go to national parks and we would hike the trails and we would be outside. And we, part of that style of trip is because of their modest means.
Sure.
Part of it is because they loved that nature. And
was there a trip that you can vividly remember from those early excursions starting at 9 around that age?
Oh, every one of them. But I guess the very first trip went up to the Canadian Rockies.
Oh,
And
what a trip.
oh, it was and I'd never seen mountains before. Grew up in the Midwest my whole life. And so I remember sleeping in the back seat, no seatbelt, just munching on my Lucky Charms, but sleeping when I could. And when the mountains were in view, my mom reached back and poked at me and woke me up. And she said, "There's your mountains." And I thought, they're my mountains? And it was, there has been an attachment to the outdoors and our national parks and a love of the road ever since.
Yeah. Wow.
As I was a kid, I used to say to my dad, boy, I wish that I could just grow up and somebody would pay me to wander and explore and take pictures. And he said,
you had no idea you were setting up your career path.
I had no idea what I was venturing toward. And my dad would say, "Well, that's not the real world. That's not the way it works." And I would say, "But why can't it be? Why couldn't this be possible?" And so my dad was really pragmatic and practical and task oriented. My mom she was a kindergarten teacher's aide, and she had a little bit of whimsy and joy and exploration in her. And I think when you put those two things together, it became me.
Yeah, it sounds like you still had all of that innate curiosity to just want to go explore, like from a little bit of your mother's instincts, but still, like, I believe a little bit of your dad's practicality brought a curiosity into your exploration that might not have been there with that more whimsical enjoyment of the experience, where I could tell you're very observant, but you're also very emotionally in tune and aware. And that's such a unique a combination to be produced. So did you have any siblings, or what was your high school / middle school like? So it sounds like you were saying, in your head, you were aware that part of you didn't want a traditional career or traditional path. But I guess when you're a child, like what are you saying you wanted to do as a career in middle school, high school? Are you planning to go to college? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think I was not particularly self-aware when I was in middle school and high school. I was a great musician. I was a trumpet player and was always sort of head of the trumpet section. And because of that, everybody thought, oh, well, John's probably going to go on to study music. And because of that, I thought, oh, I suppose I should go on to study music. And I loved music. But as a player, I had great technique and great tone, but I didn't have that stratospheric, really high range that a commercial professionally performing trumpet player would have.
Like Maynard Ferguson.
Like Maynard Ferguson. I met Maynard Ferguson once. He was a hero. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Actually,
of course, if you're a trumpet player and you love squealers, Maynard's
that's the guy. Yeah. And so okay, I'm going to insert an unexpected story here. So
okay,
when I was in high
Hit
school,
me.
Okay, all right. My high school band instructor was also a trumpet player. He had this chalk drawing of Maynard Ferguson, a portrait up on his wall that he loved. And so the day that I was going to go see Maynard Ferguson in concert, I said to my teacher, I said, do you want me to see if I can get this signed for you? Just take it to Maynard Ferguson and see if he'll autograph it. And he's like, oh my gosh, that would be great. So he took this prized possession off the wall and he handed it to me. And we drove over to the concert and I held it in my lap the whole time. And afterwards, somehow we managed to get on Maynard Ferguson's bus,
Wait, you're just sitting at this concert and did you just like wander backstage?
We wandered up to the stage, and some of the folks who were taking down the thing, I said, hey, I'm just wondering if I might get this signed. And they're like, yeah, he's probably back out on the bus. Go ahead and knock on the door.
Just some roadies like, yeah, go on back.
Yeah. So Maynard Ferguson is like lounging on this shag carpet bench with, I'm sure, a scotch or something in his hand. And I'm super nervous, right? I'm this dorky kid. And I go, excuse me, Mr. Ferguson, And he looks at it and he grabs it out of my hands and he goes, wow, man, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And he set it down and I said, you're welcome. And I left the bus.
No way.
So I had to go back to my teacher and explain to him that instead of getting his prized possession autographed, I had accidentally given it to Mayor Ferguson.
That's such a good story.
It's pretty good. It's pretty humiliating, but it's pretty good.
Wow, I had a fortunate opportunity. My buddy Eric let me know that at North Central College here in Naperville, Illinois, about 2 years ago, I believe it was, he actually came out and he did like a performance, like, or maybe it might have been another one of the great legends, but he was extremely old, and it was like one of the last times that I had the opportunity to even witness and see such an amazing trumpet player perform live. So
Yeah, it's so circling back to your original question, I was not going to be a performer. That was never going to happen. I started my college career as a music major, but eventually,
I'm only laughing because this is literally where our lives are pretty paralleled here.
Oh, is that right? Okay,
yeah.
All right. So, loved the music. Was not going to perform. Didn't really envision myself as a high school band instructor. So I started exploring some other things and wound up in journalism and storytelling. But what I find really interesting is what you learn as a musician is subtlety and nuance. You understand how to make a phrase not just technically accurate but musical. You learn how to make it beautiful, and you understand the subtleties of dynamics and pitch and tempo, and all of those subtleties really play into storytelling, and especially into the art of photography as well, paying attention to how lines come together, paying attention how the light plays across a landscape. So I really, nothing is ever a waste, right? I shifted gears, but those skills I had learned in my days as a musician have really manifested themselves and served well in this life as a photographer and a storyteller.
That's, it's really, it's interesting you bring that up, because I've never thought about it that way as well. But my entire high school and childhood career, I started playing instruments in 4th grade. I started with the clarinet and recorder, and then bridged into saxophone and singing and so on and so on. And just like you, ended up at a conservatory in college, but then was realizing that I had this deeper knack and a deeper drive to try and explore other things and other means for what this world had to offer. And I knew that music was always my love and my passion, but to an extent, it was almost a therapy in a regard, right? For me, the creation and being in the music and getting divulged and completely lost in it was more about getting an opportunity to release and just be myself and express, rather than the opportunity to, I want to perform for all of these people. I need to put on a show. And so that dichotomy sort of led me astray from needing to be performing as the key aspect of my life. But just like you were describing there, with those little nuances and understanding, it's almost as if music is very similar to Taoists, in the fact that on one half there's chaos, right? There's creativity, there's freedom, there's expression. But on the other half, there's order, there is time, there's signatures, there's keys, there's function and rules. And when an artist can blend and from a young age master both sides of that experience, I agree with you. It got rid of my learning disabilities in high school and in college for the first time ever, because it was something I was interested in. I was expanding, I was pushing myself, but it would never have been capable without the skills I attained from music.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, and one of the things, photography and writing, these are also really creative processes, and I love them and have made my career of them. One thing I do miss, though, is these are solitary pursuits. You're making, you might be photographing a person, but essentially you are driving that creative process. Music is a communal expression, and there is something really beautiful about that community of creating that music together, and I do miss that.
I can agree. I get what you're saying. Yeah, there's nothing more genuine than the connection of a bunch of musicians just jamming for the first time, or that's the best.
Yep.
So you do go to college? Did you not go to college? And Did you have photography from a young age? What was one of the first cameras you got to work on and work with?
Yeah, I think I was probably 12 when I saved enough money from
Wow.
shoveling snow and mowing lawns to buy a Canon AE1. That
Okay.
was
Wow.
my first film, of course, because I'm that old. That was my first film camera. And I remember my mom, who was super frugal, always saying, don't take so many pictures. Don't, that all costs money. But the local senior portrait and wedding guy in the town where I grew up in Beaver Dam, Wisconsin, Gary Haas was his name, and he was willing to sort of mentor me a little bit. And if I would take what I thought was a lovely picture of a mushroom, I'd bring it to him and show it to him, and he'd talk about why it was successful and how it could be better. And we only did that a few times, but I remember that making an impact on me, that he took the interest to share some of his knowledge with me. Didn't ever consider photography as a career. I did go to college, again, started out as a music major, then drifted around for a couple of years, and settled in journalism because I think for me, my curiosity was rather boundless, and journalism gave me an excuse to explore all of these things. I could write a story about a sporting event. I could write a story about a rodeo. I could write a story about a musician. Whatever I was interested in, I could explore, and this was my ticket to do so. So my degree was in writing, but I had like 30 some credits in photography between the art and the journalism department. And so was really most interested in photography as my career path. I interned at a daily paper. I then got a full-time staff job at a small daily paper. Then shifted over into the commercial world, doing some catalog and studio stuff, which I hated, but I found that I could combine the storytelling of journalism with the technical proficiency of the commercial world and produce sort of high production value stories. And that landed me in the magazine world. So for most of my career, shot for national magazines and Fortune 500 companies as an independent photographer, as a freelancer.
Wow. During the process of becoming a freelancer, what do you think were some of the most like critical learnings that you took away from that time? Let's say I'm a young photographer listening to this right now. What were maybe some of the best key takeaways you have from recalling becoming and improving on your independent work?
Yeah. One of them is just tenacity, a willingness to hustle. It at a certain point, it becomes a numbers game. And if 5 people tell you no, then you have to ask the 6th person. If 12 people tell you no, you have to ask the 13th person. And you have to find your place. You have to find your niche. And my niche became sort of human stories. I did a lot of travel photography because I could do pretty well at scenic shots. I could do pretty well at food. I could do pretty well at people. And so I was able to go into a space and come away with a full, well-rounded story. And that was sort of my gift. I used to say that well, I can't say that. No, sorry, that uses bad words. I used to be able to walk into a total mess and find the beauty in it.
I get what you were going to say.
Yeah. Something about making chicken salad out of a different product. But my gift or my ability was to walk into situations with really limited potential and find some beauty and find some imagery within that.
Now, how much of that do you think was the art of becoming more proficient as a professional, and how much of that do you think was built into the nature of your mentality on how you perceive the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of that is innate, right? But those innate things still need nurturing, and they still need development. So it took me a little while to even figure out that it was innate, because you operate on a certain paradigm, and you just assume that's the way everybody does it, and all of a sudden you go, oh, maybe everybody doesn't do it this way. And then you start to see how that mechanism works, and then you can craft it and nurture it and develop it. And I really think that became my process. And a lot of my process is not formulaic. A lot of my process is really intuitive and innate, and just happens organically. But even so, you can start to notice those patterns, and you can start to notice that process. And it's funny, because every travel job I would go into, I would show up on the location and I would go, oh my God, there's nothing here. What are we going to do? This is going to be hopeless. This is never going to work. But then you start noticing the little things. You slow down from the freeway and you get onto the little roads, and you start to see the beauty of this barn, or the way the light falls across the landscape, or the details that make Appalachia. And you start to see those little pieces, and then you start assembling them into this puzzle, and you go, okay, this is going to work. This is going to be all right. I can figure out how to tell the story of this place. And that sort of neurotic panic leading to, comfort and conviction is a process that unfolded on almost every job. And even knowing that, going into a new job, there'd still be that panic and neuroses at the beginning of it.
It's really interesting you bring that up too, because I can see just in your eyes as you describe this, there's so much passion and care for what you do, but it's so interesting that it starts with that neuroticy, and then bridges into, okay, this is something that is making sense and flows appropriately. Do you think there's almost like maybe a little bit of a gambler's rush chemically happening, right? Your brain goes into a anxiety or an adrenaline state, enjoys that, but then is able to work through it. Like, do you think there's something maybe occurring chemically that could match the passion that innately is coming out of this activity? Because the way you describe that is so fascinating, but it also reminded me exactly of this podcast. And when I go back and listen to it and I edit it, I sit there and I'm listening to the same conversation again, but I'm pulling out new things, or I'm getting new things. And when I like title an episode or a show, it's that same process of, well, once I listened to it, what was the beauty of this particular story that I had, and how can I highlight that through a title in which might be more vague, but allow someone else to maybe inspire or get their own feeling for what this interesting conversation might be. And it's slightly different than how you described it with yours, but it's fascinating too, because I do feel that way right before this conversation today. And when I was sitting upstairs, I got a little bit of the nerves and the anxiety in my stomach, and I drank my water. I did my breaths, but then I felt extremely excited. Like, I always push myself towards the uncomfortability. And as I do, it starts to flow and make sense. And then I always leave and I'm like, man, I had such a great time during that process. But it had that, again, I faced that tumultuous feeling at the beginning prior to it, or as I'm going through it. And it sounds like that's also something that you might feel. Could you talk to that a little bit? Or is that, what do you think about what I just maybe went and rambled on there?
Yeah, no. I think as you describe it as that gambler's rush, and it does sound like a dopamine hit of some sort. That,
Sure.
but I think that not panic, but that tension and that concern at the beginning of the story, because you got nothing in the can, right? You're starting with a blank slate. Is that tension is part of what drives me to look closer at a place. It's part of what makes me go, wait a minute, if I'm not seeing it over here, what if I turn and look at it a different way? What if I flip it over and look at it that way? And so that anxiety that's built into the early parts of the process is part of what drives you to examine it a little bit closer and to look at it a little bit more deeply. And that it's also part of why I think I was successful in doing that, because of that drive, because of that neuroses, because of whatever pushed me a little bit further to make sure that I could do it. I mean, on the one hand, fear of starvation is a powerful motivator. So as a freelancer, if you blow the job, they're not going to call you again.
Right.
So there's some of that involved, but really it is more related, I think, to the exercise of, I have to show this place well. What's going to do that? And I think once I laid down sort of a baseline of images and I could look at this body of work, on a 7-day job, you get 4 days into it. You're like, okay, I've had some good light. I've gotten some good landscapes. I've gotten some good portraits in here. Where are those holes that remain? And I think at that point, I could always start slowing down and figuring out where are those extra little accents that are really going to elevate this series from, okay, we checked off all the boxes, to, ooh, this is sort of transformative.
I like that. I wanted to ask and go into some of your past stories. Is there maybe one story or a story you covered in your past that you are extremely, extremely proud of, or one that you recall being like the first time in your head you were like, you know what, I didn't just do this and I was satisfied, I did this and I'm completely proud of what I did? And maybe one that was hard, or one in which the path to creating that story was extremely difficult, or one where you were completely unaware until literally like the last minute, like maybe a harder story to tell. Do you have a story of one of each?
One of each. Okay, I'm going to let you remind me of that second prompt once
Sure.
I get through the first one. The first time I went to a developing nation, I went to Central America. I went to Honduras with a dental mission that was sponsored by Rotary to photograph an American dentist with a Honduran dentist that were driving up into remote villages and pulling bad teeth, basically. And I had traveled extensively in the United States. I'd been a little bit to Canada. No, I'd been quite a bit to Canada, a little bit to Mexico, but I'd never been to Central America. And Honduras was eye-opening for me, both because of the need, sort of the financial sort of tangible need in the country, but also because of the spirit and the soul and the beauty of the people. They had a material poverty, but a spiritual wealth that I found really interesting and appealing. But when I went down there to photograph that story, that was the first time that I felt like I had a really rich visual and sort of rich narrative story to tell. And so that was a profound and moving experience. Also, because I was a little nervous and uncomfortable going there, having never been to Central America before, not speaking the language, not really knowing the people I was traveling with, it was a leap of faith to do that.
And how old were you at the time?
Our kids were pretty young. I was probably 26, 27.
Wow. Yeah.
Something like that. Also didn't know, we were in a tenuous financial position, and I didn't really know if I could sell this story. I didn't really know if it was going to be marketable, but it was worth a chance. And so, yeah, that was a profound experience for me. A couple years after that, so we could work backwards on the math. Whatever year Hurricane Mitch hit Honduras, I don't remember what that was, but it was the 90s, early 90s, I think. And when that happened, I had just recently been there, so I had sort of a heart for the country. And I went to my pastor, Lutheran church in the suburbs of Bloomington, and I said to him, I've always wanted to be part of a church that has this global vision that can reach outside of its walls and help other people, whether it's education or microfinance or health or women's issues, whatever it is, thinking that he was going to go ahead and do that. And he listened politely to me, explaining my desire for that sort of outreach. And then he said, well, I think that's a great idea, John. Why don't you go ahead and do that? And I'll support you any way that I can. And that was not the response I expected from him. I had grown up thinking that institutions and churches were a top-down sort of structure where you go to the boss guy and tell him what should happen. And if they like the idea, they'll go ahead and do it. But he flipped that on me and basically said, well, if you think that should happen, go ahead and I'll be your support network. So I got a dozen people from our church to go down and help start rebuilding a house for a woman in Honduras about a year later. But that empowerment that he offered me to take an idea and run with it and see it to fruition, I think was pivotal for me understanding my own power in creating change.
Yeah, it's truly, it is the key difference too, right? Like I notice so often in our generation specifically, I'm 22 years old. In Gen Z, we have so many stimuli around us that allow us to be completely aware of how to succeed and how easy it is to succeed, but we never have that ability to jump off and finally do it, that entrepreneurial instinct to some regard. And it's crazy too that a conversation with your pastor allowed you, he basically said, you have to have the entrepreneurial DNA and imprint in yourself. I love it, and I'm going to support and be here for you. But he recognized as a leader, being the person that does it always time isn't the strongest conviction in order to lead someone or in order for them to find their own path. And it was so unique that through your relationship with him and through that intimacy, you were able to have sort of like an entrepreneurial awakening that anything that I want to do is achievable. It's just in me, and I have to go ahead and put that tenacity forward. Like you said, you have to work hard to try and achieve and do it. And that's super unique.
Well, and I heard you say something related to Gen Z, and I don't think it's solely your experience. I think it's a really human experience that very often we think if we know that we're at point A and we want to get to point B, sometimes we believe that we have to see the entire path that leads us to B before we take the first step. And I think that in many ways that can be paralyzing, and in many ways it short circuits the process, because I think this project that I've worked on called A Piece of My Mind, had I seen the entire arc of the path, I never would have started. But what I could see was those first two steps. And it's like walking down a foggy path where if you take those steps, then the next ones will be revealed, and you have to have some faith and some trust when you're trying to succeed, when you're trying to move toward that goal, that even if you don't understand the entire process to get there, starting some motion is going to set you off on the path, and you can figure out the rest later. And like we said before, you're going to fail, you're going to hit some roadblocks, you're going to reroute yourself a little bit, but that's just part of the learning process. When I run into a wall, I sort of back up and go, okay, well, that didn't work. What if I turn over here? And then you go down that path, and that's the painful process of learning and charting your own path that I think a lot of people are afraid to actually start.
Wow. You're not wrong there. That was extremely wise. Yeah, that's exactly it. It reminded me directly of this saying, planning is everything, but plans mean nothing.
Yeah, you got to do.
Yep, you got to do. And the way you describe that too, like that makes it such a clear visualization. I'm very visual. Like if it's a foggy path and you just step on the first two stones, you'll see that third stone once you're on stone 2. Right? The fog will clear in front of you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
It includes some faith.
Yeah.
It includes some trust in the process that it's going to be okay. And you don't always have to know every element of the journey with certainty.
Thank you for that. I wanted to go now on the other spectrum, a story or one that might have been very, very difficult to get out. Not one that was maybe like one you didn't enjoy, but one that was an extremely difficult process to go through.
I guess I'll relate this back to my travel photography. And so as an independent contractor, you don't get paid until you deliver the product. Sure. If we're talking about the pragmatic nuts and bolts of this, you don't get your paycheck until you give them the pretty pictures. And so as a travel photographer, sometimes you look at the forecast of what's coming up and you go, oh no, it's going to be overcast, it's going to be rainy, it's going to be gross for this whole 7-day window. What on earth am I going to do? But sometimes your schedule would line up so that, the 3 weeks before that are already full. The 3 weeks after that are already full. You just got to go and cross your fingers and hope something's going to be okay. And I remember one particular job in Michigan. It was in the summer. It was supposed to be all, beaches and sand and pretty blue sky, but it was just looking like gray the whole time. And there's nothing less appealing than gray sky reflecting into gray water on a flat, dead beach. But we had to make it work. And almost every day, the sun would pop out for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, and it would be glorious. It would be amazing. And during those rainy, dreary parts, we would spend our time scouting and looking at the locations that we wanted to shoot if ever the sun came out. At the end of that week, it's frustrating and demoralizing, and that neuroses goes into overdrive. Oh my God, we're never going to get this. And so, but by the end of and I didn't tell the client this at all. I just sort of, kept it close to myself. And I thought, well, let's do the best we can. At the end of the week, another week of editing, shipped off the images to the client, and they said, oh my God, you had an amazing week. That must have been the most beautiful week we've ever seen. And
wow,
I think if you did the math during that 7 days, there was probably a total of 1 hour of sunshine. But because we were ready for it, we capitalized on that, and we were able to show those little snippets that added up to a beautiful job. Super stressful going through it, but we didn't quit. We did the best we could, and we showed some beauty in a really difficult week.
I think that's a fantastic story of both resilience and also like to depict like you could tell where beginner lies and where someone who is in the industry and gets it is. And that's sort of, I think, where my next question was coming from. From a technical perspective, how can you tell someone's professional versus not professional? Like, what are some key things? Like, if I were to show you maybe 10 photos right now, could you tell me you think, oh, this guy's a professional, this guy's probably on his way, this guy's never taken a photo in his life?
Yeah. I always joke that, anybody can take a pretty picture when everything goes perfect, but the true sign of a professional is turning in a good product when everything goes to hell. Can you keep your cool? Can you keep showing up? Can you make something beautiful out of something awful? For me, aesthetically, there's subtleties of lines, there's subtleties of composition in, again, how the light plays across the landscape. And I watch for depth in an image, some interesting foreground, some leading lines, some background. I watch for, interesting kinds of light, whether that's, shadows playing across a landscape in some new and interesting ways, new perspectives. Almost always a first-time photographer or a newbie is going to shoot all of their pictures from their standing position right here. But you get somebody up on a high perch, or you get someone laying down on their belly, and you know that someone's starting to play around with perspective and viewpoint. And I have a friend who says that that photography can do two things. It can show you new things, or it can show you familiar things in new ways. And so when you start to show those familiar things in new ways, I know that someone's really being thoughtful about it, and that drops them in the professional category for me.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's the first time I've heard a photographer talk or depict that sort of relationship there. And that's now I immediately visualize when I went to the Chicago Museum of Modern Art and I saw a photography exhibit, and this photographer, it was a shot in a, what is that called? Where they're examining a dead body.
In the morgue?
Yes, it was in a morgue at a hospital, and it was a dead hand, and it was just peeking outside of the covering because the body was fully covered. But the way that the hand was like reaching out, and there was like a single drop of blood on the finger, it almost looked like if you didn't recognize or read the description that it was a morgue, you just thought it was somebody took someone's hand of someone who was alive, put it under a blanket, and like they were reaching out to like some just abyss or nothingness. But when you stepped back and then read the description for the first time ever, it sparked that feeling in me of like, whoa, there's something about this experience with death that I'm having that's unlike any other experience I've had, where I've felt or emotionally was trying to comprehend the experience that is death. And I've never really been able to like depict why I appreciated that moment so much. But the way you described that actually made me realize why I appreciated that moment so much. It was
Hmm.
exactly that. I was
Yeah.
looking at death, but I was looking at it for the first time in a way that inspired me to think of it differently.
And I think that those are the things that can wake us up. Those are the things that can expand our horizons. And it's one of the beauties of art,
Mm.
right? That it can dust off the normalcy of our experience, and it can help wake us up to that beauty and wisdom that's all around us.
Mm. I have a really strange philosophy question that I don't know if it's real or not. It could be anything, but I was just thinking about the concept. We were talking about photos and how you said the word shadows and how maybe a shadow creates a new sort of movement or feeling that you might not have experienced or seen before. And how when that occurs, you might be able to capture it in a photo, but will everyone see that photo forever? And the case is probably not. So then, therefore, isn't a photo the ability to capture something of permanence, but then really there is no permanence? It's just impermanence, and a photo is impermanence. But then it makes me think, what is the meaning or the purpose of a photo? If you can't, if you want to capture it and you want to hold on to it forever, and there is this need for permanence of that moment in our brain, but then we recognize that once we're gone, that photo might die, it might get rained on, it might water you, the file might corrupt. There is a impermanence to the ability for that photo to exist forever. So I'm curious, from your perspective, what is the purpose of a photo?
I view my photography really as journaling.
Mm.
Um, and in some way reflecting the moment that I had been in. And when I journal, part of that process is to help me understand that moment. When I'm writing like that, it's helping me take these nebulous ideas in my mind and commit them to paper in a way that I can understand them better. When I have to
Mm.
articulate them, when I have to say it out loud, it helps to clarify my thought process. So that's the written word. When I am visually journaling, it helps me to see the world around me. It helps me to look more closely at a scene. It helps me understand how the elements of the scene are working together. And it helps me more fully experience the moment. I know some
Beautiful.
people in our modern culture where we're constantly photographing everything, sometimes that photography process can distract from the actual living. When
Mm.
our kids were younger and they were in show choir or they were playing on a basketball team, I would tell them, I will photograph one game for you and your friends and share all of the photos, but the other games I want to just be a parent,
Yeah.
because I could be a good photographer or I could be a good dad, but it was hard to be both at the same time. And
Mm.
so I understand that idea that the process of photographing can get in the way of actually living. If you're having dinner with somebody and you're focused on Instagramming your plate of food and not the dialogue of the people that you're with, it can diminish that human experience. But also for me, when I am traveling, when I'm exploring, when I'm photographing in that sort of intentional way, it can help me more deeply experience a place the way that writing can in my thought process.
I
So
hear
whether that
you.
photo
That's so
is,
unique.
sorry, whether that
Yeah.
photo is permanent or not, it has enhanced a process that
Yep.
helps me experience that moment.
Mm. I recognize that now. I can understand. It's less about the that this is, it's like it's not necessarily that we take a photo because it is about the permanence. It is about an ability to, almost like meditation, use it as another means for centering and being present. of that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I like how you said that. Exactly. What you said.
Yeah.
I
That's so cool. Yeah,
agree.
no,
Dittos.
cool. Yeah, no, I just love running. I just, I think, and I'm trying to run so many circles so I can just really fully try and grasp this topic, because I never think about photography in this sense. And another question that makes me think about is a word that gets thrown around in journalism nowadays, and something that gets thrown around a lot is, and we're in a gig, or not a gig economy. I mean, an experience economy, right? You talked about Instagram, you talked about social media. We're all longing for more attention, and we're all longing to see and grasp onto something or some other form of media. Do you think that has made your job harder because there are more photographers, or everyone's a photographer? Or do you think it's made your job in a way easier because there's more access or more capability to view as easily? What is your what is your pros and cons to this whole new entertainment-based economy that we want to be experiencing a lot of rich culture and arts, and we're all absorbing it all the time?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the world of photography has changed dramatically since I started my career, and it used to be that clients and magazines and news outlets were looking for a really finely crafted story. They were looking for a highly produced, highly competent end goal, and they would pay well to do that. Well, eventually the business of media became more about profit. It became less about quality. It became more about filling a hole and just pushing content out there. And as we shifted into the digital realm, it became easier for a lot of people to make pretty decent photos. Maybe not transformative photos, but pretty solid photos. And so, jobs that used to pay $300 a shot were now just sort of snapped by the intern for nothing. Or jobs that used to, pay you for 7 days of photography, maybe now instead they would just reach out to the resort and say, hey, what do you have that we can use for free? Or they would start cobbling together things off of Instagram feeds to populate their news articles and maybe give somebody a byline instead of a living wage. And so that has really changed as I've developed a piece of my mind, my own project. It's more about concept and it's more about content. Nobody else really has this particular content. And so I can't, it felt to me like photography started becoming a commodity, just like paper clips, just like anything else. And if it was cheap and good enough to fill the hole on the page, that's all sort of the corporate consumer media stream cared about. And I didn't want to compete with that. I didn't want to chase that game to the bottom of the pit. I wanted to disengage. And so instead, when I created my own content, if somebody was interested in it, then I was able to steer that the way I saw fit, instead of simply responding to some client's needs for particular imagery.
I think that makes sense, and I think that's something exactly that I would do. I feel like I'd feel that same exact sort of energy from the corporate versus independent track. And so I want to now, let's take some time. I want to go into a piece of my mind. Let's go back to the start of that before it's even happening. What is the impetus to get you to want to create this project? Where were you at creatively in your head? And I guess then what were the steps? What were the stones that you took that cleared the fog?
Yeah, there were two things going on about 12 years ago, 2008, 2009. Okay. The first, and things were robust in my freelance work, running 100 miles an hour. Phone was ringing and we were responding and doing some really fun stuff, photographing, working as crew on a schooner, sailing out of Key West to Dry Tortugas, photographing in spas in Chicago, doing food stories in Chicago. Stories. Some fun stuff. But I was increasingly frustrated with the quality of our national dialogue.
Mm,
I was concerned about all the things that ask us to look at what can separate us.
yep.
Politics, ethnicity, religion, gender, class, you name it. You get all sorts of tools at your disposal if you want to divide. But I wondered if there was something I could do. This is a social worker and the educator of my parents coming out in me. I wondered if, as well as that story of my pastor who said, yeah, you want to do this? Go for it. I'll help you out. So I wondered if there was something I could do with my photography and storytelling instead to look at what connects us, to try to remember the common humanity that we
Do you know
share.
how refreshing that is to hear someone say, literally, like, all I feel like in this climate is that everything is about exactly what you're talking about. Let's find and try to find every part of us that isn't unified rather than find the commonalities that are so beautiful and do bring us together. That is really refreshing. So, okay, you come up with your hypothesis. Now, how do you make that a reality? How do you do that? What is sort of in your head? What was this could do that?
Well, so let me backpedal just a second and say that when you are looking for those things, whether you are looking for the things that divide us or the things that unite us, you're going to find them. You know, wherever you put your focus, you're going to see more and more and more of it. It's like a gratitude journal. You start writing notes of gratitude for yourself, you will start to see it more often. So this was sort of the mindset that I was in. What if we focused on these positive things? Don't ignore the challenges, but approach it with the grace, hope, and belief that something better is possible, and look for examples of success so that we could model that for our future behavior. So that was the mindset. The pragmatism is that I like to say the economy handed me some free time. The recession hit the world of freelance photography really hard. I think if I'm honest, I was really hankering for something new. I wanted to develop some personal project, but if the phone had kept ringing and offering me work and offering me money, I probably would have kept saying yes. You know, as a freelancer, you're not accustomed to turning that work away. But when the work went away on its own, because of the economy, because all these magazines they used to shoot for just plain out folded, they just went away. When I had that space presented to me, I had to decide what to do with it. And a better business person probably would have looked for new clients, but I had worn out on that. I was that well was running dry. And so instead I used that space to pursue this new thing. And, you know, like that foggy path, I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how it would take shape. So I thought, well, let's just do one interview. And I did one interview and that was interesting. So I did another interview and that was interesting. And pretty soon I started developing this body of work. And that was, you know, that was the first baby steps of this project, this media arts project we have now called A Piece of My Mind.
I want to touch something that came up to me while you were talking there that I thought about, and it was I two things. One, your ability to allow your faith and your your higher your higher ability to just let go and believe so heavily in faith is something that I think is so heavily lost and is something that has never been ran by a centralized civilization that has all of the fortunate technologies we have. What I mean is, if we look back starting in the 1900s during the impetus of manufacturing and industrial civilization, what we start to see is two things, in my opinion. I think we start to see increased consumerism, and consumerism allows us to be clouded and focus more on, right? Oh, this new thing came out, this came out, or how can I benefit a human in a selfish manner? And then the second thing is people, as we developed into a manufactured and a more evolved society, they started worrying less about faith and about love. And many of our countries and many of the foundings and the principles of our civilizations, they have such good moral foundings, but they're missing that love and that driving faith that you need to back morals, right? Because faith allows the morals to be something you can fully embody and live in a really good sense. And so then this all led me to think, literally from just what you were saying, that we are in a society where we're all philosophers, but we're philosophers caught up in the consumerism, meaning that when you said, when I finally had the work gone for me, right, I would have stayed in my consumerist mentality of, I need to survive, I need to provide for my family, the work is there, why not just keep doing it? But once that was stripped from you and all you were left with just your personal human ability and your traits, the curiosity and the impact of being a philosopher and someone who can look at the world in a way and leave some positive critique on it in a regard that would allow people to open a discussion, that is so unique and so fascinating. And it's making me really realize the like there is some beauty and some importance to come out of this tumultuous time that we faced. And like, it makes me think how many other people are just in a similar boat to you, where for the first time ever in their life, they're getting a chance to breathe in a way that allows the philosophy side of their brain to just come up with something that might leave a lasting impact on this society.
I mean, I do think that's really true. I really, now we're seeing that sort of pause again, of course, with COVID. And I do believe that it has allowed people to step back from the race, step back from the hurried pace, and reconsider what's important. I think that it's one of the reasons why when George Floyd was killed in Minneapolis, which was just a few miles north of where our house was,
No kidding.
that it's one of the reasons why it gained so much attention and got so many people involved, because we were sitting in a place where we had slowed down, where we had a little bit of the luxury of time to respond, where we were able to, I mean, especially the early days of the pandemic, we were all feeling extraordinarily vulnerable. And that leads us to a conversation about what is important, what are my values, how are we operating in this world? And I think a shift happened there. Certainly there have been other police killings of Black men throughout history, and there has been a response, but then we get distracted by our need to get back to the office or go to our next wedding or, go watch the football game. And in this case, we were sitting collectively in the luxury of time so that we could really respond to this in a way that included that philosophy and that sort of spiritual response and that deep understanding of who we are and who we want to be as individuals and as a society.
That is beautiful. I want to get deeper into a piece of my mind. Let's go through that first interview. What was that like? And what did they develop into? And could you maybe share some of the stories or a little bit of some takeaways before someone were to maybe read the book itself or pick it up for us?
Yeah, of course. And so the basic structure of this whole project was rooted around personal narrative, and because I'm a photographer, images. And so the model became that we would craft these conversations, these recorded interviews around the question, what does peace mean to you? So there were some standard questions. What does peace mean to you? How do you work towards it in your life? What are some of the obstacles you encounter along the way? Tell me an example of a time when you saw peace manifest itself in your life.
Wow.
But really, I was interested in peace because most people I've met would welcome a little bit more of it in their lives, their immediate family,
No kidding.
their community, the bigger world. Even my friends who serve in the US military would prefer to stay home with their families when they could. But there's this disconnect between what we say we value and how we live our day-to-day lives. So you have a high school student that flashes the peace sign while they walk down the hallway, but then they turn around and they form into a clique and bully their own classmate. My own Lutheran church, you have people that nod up and down while they listen to the story of the Good Samaritan, helping someone in need, no matter who it is. And then they will walk right by somebody in need the next day, like it's not their problem.
Yep.
Right. And this is not a critique of my church. It's a critique of the human condition, because this disconnect happens all the time. So that was really the foundation of what I wanted to talk about. What I found over time is that this question of peace allowed people to talk about political peace or spiritual peace or inner peace. It really simply opened a door for folks to talk about what was on their heart. So this exercise became an exercise in deep listening, in intentional listening. So I would have those set lists of questions that we would go through, but in the process, people would share, much like you're doing, people would share an idea and then it would trigger a thought. And so my favorite questions simply and they're not questions at all, simply became, tell me more, or, help me understand that a little bit better. And that process of deep listening, eventually, like I said, we turned this into a body of work. I tried to talk to people from all different backgrounds: Muslim, Christian, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, atheist, agnostic, people who were Holocaust survivors and homeless individuals, people who've been through the prison system and returning veterans, and this broad cross-section of who we are diversity. And younger and older, and really trying to weave this fabric of who we are as a society and how we can find ways to live better together. And so over time, we share these as podcasts and on the website and on social media. We created a couple of books out of these stories. We created 4 traveling exhibits, and then we built out this public programming. And so I will take these stories, not to tell people the secret meaning of peace, but we'll install them in public spaces to encourage people to engage in the conversation about conflict resolution and civic responsibility and social change, and how we can figure out how to navigate all of these really challenging issues together for the common good. Again, there's the educator and the social worker of my parents coming out in me.
Yeah.
And so we'll go to colleges or universities. We're at a middle school this weekend. We go to conferences. We go to community centers and libraries. Right now, I've got an exhibit at the public library in Everett, Washington, and one at this middle school in Wisconsin. We've got 4 exhibits. And we use this as a way to bring people together, to have conversations, and to build community.
Could you further describe maybe one of the exhibits? What is it like for me?
Yeah. So we have 4 exhibits. The first one that I built was sort of a classic gallery exhibit. So canvas gallery wraps, each of the prints 24 by 36, and it would hang on the wall.
Cool.
And it's got a large portrait of the person. It's got their name and a little biography of who they are, and then a 200 or 300 word excerpt from this extended conversation that we had. So edited and curated content from their interviews. I realized pretty quick that some of the people who were interested in the project were not the same people who had control over the wall space at their institution. So somebody who ran a leadership project or a civic engagement project or a faith-based project or a conference organizer who wanted this exhibit might not have the right to pound a nail into the wall and hang a print. So then, again, this is one of those dead ends or walls that I bang into, and I go, well, that's an obstacle to getting this content out. So then we produced our next exhibit is portable display banners. Those kind where the base sits on the floor and the retractable banner pops up.
Yeah. Like when you're walking a convention hall, all the booths set those up.
Yeah, exactly. And so we repurposed the content on those sort of banners. So now if I had a library or a student union or somebody who wanted the exhibit, as long as they had floor space, we could put it up, and it was flexible enough to move around. And it did another thing sort of aesthetically that I loved about the exhibit process. When pictures hung on the wall, a person would stand in front of one and read it, and then they'd shuffle over to the next one and they'd read it. And they didn't necessarily engage with the other people in the exhibit who were viewing the exhibit. They were just sort of shoulder to shoulder shuffling down the line. When we install these display banners in a space, it's more of a 3-dimensional experience. So we'll put them in little pods of 3 or 4 grouping through the space. And as people walk through it, they might actually bump into somebody, or they might make eye contact because they're circulating amongst each other, and it creates a more communal public experience.
Yeah, that's really, really unique then, because what it's doing is it's not only saying that you're coming here to observe this piece of art and to represent the story and to hear the piece in these people's lives that they have, but now you are creating an ecosystem of peace, generating and observing peace. And now it's a live art exhibit in its own self, in its own right. Have you ever done that? Have you ever photographed or tried to create a meta picture of the picture of your art that's being created in that space like that?
It's interesting. We play around with all sorts of different models. It's really fun for me because I connect with some of these folks who have been subjects of the interviews. As I travel around the country, if they're within a few hours of where I'm going to be, I'll reach out to them. And so sometimes people who have been in the project will actually come to the exhibit, and then I get to take the picture of them with the picture of them in the exhibit.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at.
But here's what we also do. We started doing this interactive piece with these studio sessions. And so when the exhibit, it sets the tone for these conversations. It invites people into these conversations. Then at conferences and colleges and community centers, we'll set up a studio. Photo booth would be the more common term, but it's more produced than that. We'll set up a studio. We'll come up with a prompt, and it's always related to mission, vision, and values in the world. We'll ask people to respond in 25 words or less, and I'll do a black and white portrait of them. So we just did this with veterans around PTSD and healing, and we just asked them, what do you want people to understand? I've done it in conversations about race, asking what's the unique opportunity or challenge of talking about race at this moment in history. We did it at a retreat around, it was a faith-based retreat around the concept of fear not. So we asked people, when have you found unexpected courage in your life? And in the course of a day, we can do 20 or 30 or 50 or sometimes 100 of these. And then I flip the production really quickly, put the photos with the words over the top of them, string it into a video, and then I present them back to the community. So it's this really immediate, interactive way for a community to start to see themselves and their peers in new ways through this form of art.
It's so fascinating because I feel like you would maybe describe or others would describe you as an artist, but I just see you more as a philosopher and someone who is trying to inspire Socratic discussion. I see you more as Socrates than I'd say as Leonardo da Vinci and like an artist in that regard. It's I don't mean that like to diss or anything. Like you are an artist. I'm not trying.
No, I'll take that. I'll welcome that. Thank you.
It's so unique. It's really refreshing. And have you tried taking? So I guess I don't understand. Let's get maybe a little more into the business side of it. Have you tried taking your exhibit, specifically this live format one, to like a larger contemporary art museum or something like that? Have you, or can you do that as an independent, or do you need to have like a manager? Like, how does that work?
Oh no, I think that could work. You know, we have been so busy chasing the doors that have opened to us that's a place that we haven't been yet. But I think it would be really interesting. And if any of your listeners have any connections and want to explore that, I would be happy to have that conversation, because I think it would be really interesting to start out in a completely white, blank, enormous space. Yes. And over the course of a month, engage the public and start populating that with the locals, print these out and start populating this until it's an enormous cloud of witnesses to what is going on in our public realm these days. Oh yeah, let's do that, Chad.
Hell yeah, I'm in. You got me sold.
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it in Chicago so you can come be a part of it.
I would adore that. And that's what I was thinking. Like, this sounds like something that I would want to experience. Because my favorite museum in Chicago is the Contemporary Art Museum, because the exhibits are never the same. You can go there and all the floors are always changing. And I love that. And I've even gone there and there was an exhibit where it was all of these old VHS and TVs and record players and stuff, but some of them were like program looping and playing very similar things and repeatable things. Some of them were just like broken glass where you're just staring at yourself. And it was really this like contemplation and play on like both our connectivity with technology, but also how technology itself is formulating and changing. And that was so unique, but it was exactly what you were describing. I was in a space and everything wasn't just on the walls and I'm walking in a square format. Everything was immersive. I'm now one with the art. I am the art. And I think there's something that's just so much. There's a reason people love Kanye West, and it's because you feel like you are a part of the art. You don't feel like he's just being an artist for all the selfish intention. You really feel like he's doing something so unique that if you grab onto it, you can also be creating that same art in some way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Lovely. The art, when you talk about the Socratic process, the art really is simply the tool to bring people together and engage, to connect and to see one another in transformative ways.
This makes me then ask too and think, have you ever thought about doing one of these same exhibits and then just like sort of you did with the video format at the end where you have them stand, say a prompt, and then you cut it together and create this, this cohesive story there. Have you thought about doing a round table ever with any of the people who come, like hosting a session, maybe a smaller one where it's 30, 40 minutes, right? Everyone does the exhibit, but then every single person who bought a ticket to that specific event gets to sit at like a big round table and then you guys talk about it. Have you ever thought about something like that?
Yeah, we're playing around with different formats, and one of the things that I want to do is sort of a week-long workshop around
Cool.
This body of work where we can have conversations about hope and healing and forgiveness and taking risk, and have maybe a couple dozen people who are involved and do some long-term workshopping with them, some journaling, some writing, and then at the end come together and sort of reflect on that process. So not at all unlike what you're talking about. And I think it will happen. We had a pause button with COVID when we couldn't really do public programming. That's just starting to come back alive. And so again, what it gave us was the opportunity to step back and imagine some new possibilities. And I love some of what you're talking about. When in Minneapolis, when George Floyd was killed, I brought that studio. I mean, it was just one light on a little rolling cart that I brought down to 38th and Chicago, the intersection where that happened. And we simply asked people, what do you want to say? And over the course of that week, right after it happened, we had 50 people who responded. And there's a big church up the road that had this enormous blank white wall, 20 feet by 30 feet. And I talked with them and we projected those images 20 by 30 on the side of that building exterior for 10 days in a row as public art to share it back to the community. And it was pretty powerful. So we've used that model in other places as well.
It's really interesting too and fascinating. Like I would love to see more artists taking on a similar like mentality that you have. It's almost as if like you're allowing your art to become like almost like mini flash mobs in a sense, like mini flash mobs of discussion and critiquing. It's like it's kind of like Banksy does, right? Banksy will create a piece and he'll put it out in public, or he'll put it somewhere else where people are just interacting with it, and it builds this grandeur because its ability to express and connect with the society. And it's so cool and fascinating that you're thinking and doing similarly, that but in your own style, in your own regard, and you're doing it too with not selfish intention. Like I can tell it's about the idea of this is about you who is experiencing it. This is about all of us together and all of us getting to experience, listen, and interact, because that's something that's so, you're right. It's so lost. It's so fragmented right now that people only want to have discussions with either someone who might align with their tribe, or they only want to think in a certain regard. And like the idea of listening and just hearing out another idea right now is too overwhelming, when really in all of history and all of communication and conversation, being able to just listen and hear someone else and not allow it to affect you in an emotional sense was something that was so normalized. But we almost like, as a society, we forget sometimes how to communicate and how to conversate. And so when we are in a world where so much diffraction and fragmentation and so much dissonance and so much chaos is highlighted, it's really, really refreshing and enlightening to hear someone willing to push back against that in a way that's not saying, hey, this has to be this way, but hey, why don't we open up an open table for discussion?
Yeah, I think especially after the pandemic, I think we're out of practice with how to be together.
Yeah.
We
Precisely.
need to rehearse how to connect with people. We need to relearn some of those skills that have been set aside for a year and a half. And I think and I hope that A Piece of My Mind can be a mechanism that helps communities do that. I think there's an old Zulu adage that says, I see you, I hear you, and you matter. And I think that is a powerful gift that we can give to one another. And it's one of the goals of A Piece of My Mind, to see you, to hear you, and to acknowledge your worth, and to quiet my own voice. I can be the curator and the facilitator, but to quiet my own voice and amplify other voices, whoever those people might be. Even just with the middle schoolers we've been working with this week, when they are invited in to share a story in this studio setting, there's a sense of, wow, you're paying attention to me. What I have to say matters. And I know that tomorrow, when we go back and we reflect these stories in the student assembly, they will begin to see their classmates and their peers in new ways as they talk about moments of pain or moments of triumph or moments of humanity in their own life. They've made themselves vulnerable. And now we can share that with the community. And I have only ever seen people respond positively to that sort of engagement.
Yep.
It's encouraging.
Truly, truly. I wanted to ask and maybe dive a little deeper from your perception. You said the one thing that you asked about for everyone was peace. What were some of the things that people said or that you took away from what when you would pose those questions? I remember you said the best question you could have asked was just sort of, well, tell me more. So I guess tell me more. What did you hear and understand from the piece?
Yeah, I mean, it's we talk about a lot of these lessons and a lot of this wisdom in our new book, Portraits of Peace. And
this is a perfect bridge into that conversation too.
Yeah, and my goal is to, in that book, is to do two things: talk about my personal journey of encountering difference, of challenging my own expectations, about being a better ally, about having the faith to step out and do something new and different. And it ties those stories into the wisdom of the people that I've encountered along the way. So that's, people like Panina Bowman, who grew up in World War II Europe, and she tells a story about a day when soldiers showed up at their door and they said, well, you got 10 minutes to pack your bags and you got to go. And they didn't know where they were going to go, but they wound up getting on a train and going to Auschwitz.
Wow.
And so both of her parents and 42 members of her family died there. And she talked about how impossible it was to find any sense of peace there. But she also goes on to say that while she was there, she made a choice not to hate, because she realized that hate's a really powerful weapon, and it's intended to destroy somebody else, but in fact it circles back and it destroys you instead.
Wow.
And people like oh no, names. Why is a name escaping me right now? I'll think of a new one. I'll share with you Hashim Garrett, who was a little boy in Brooklyn growing up, and he was picked on and he was scared a lot. And he finally realized that maybe if he befriended his tormentors, they might not torment him as much. And in fact, this worked for a little while. But then they started, skipping school. They started robbing convenience stores. They started hurting other people. And turns out he was in a gang. this developed into a gang. And he said at first that was really intoxicating and powerful, because when he was good, nobody knew who he was. But when he was bad, everybody knew his name. And there was a power in that. But eventually, when he was 15, he was shot in the back and paralyzed from the waist down.
Holy
and
cow.
when he was laying on the ground, he realized that he didn't want to be feared. He wanted to be loved. And he said this quote that sticks with me to this day. And he said, I want to love those who may not love me back. I want to be kind to those who may not deserve my kindness. And to me, it's really easy to love the ones that love us back. But when we can love our adversary, when we can approach the world with that sort of compassion and empathy and care, then we're on sacred ground. And that can be transformative for how we interact in the world. There's whimsy in it too. I interviewed a guy named Kenny Terrio, who's a third generation Cajun shrimper in Chauvin, Louisiana.
Hell yeah. That sounds so cool.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, I have to ask myself, if I'm trying to talk about peace, why am I connecting with a shrimper? But what has he got to say, right? But he started talking about community, and he started talking about when he was growing up in Chauvin. He said, down in the bayou, he said, when some guy needed a boat, we'd all get together and we'd build him a boat. And then the next guy, he needed a boat, so we get together and we build him a boat. And pretty soon, everybody in the place had a boat, and that worked out really good. So that notion of community, that notion of people who are making sure everybody in their proximity has what they need and the resources in order to thrive, that's absolutely connected to my understanding of peace and Kenny's understanding of peace. And to me, the beauty of it in a body of work like this is that each individual story has beauty and merit and worth, but you start weaving them together, and one person's looking at it from over here and another person's looking at it from over there, and you start putting together this enormous fabric of who we are and how we understand the world, and it becomes beautiful.
Are there any common correlations, even though everyone's living such varied experience, right? You just talked about someone who became paralyzed and handicapped to someone who's literally a completely different community, fishing and trying to capture food. What was there any commonalities or some correlations that you could have made from your experiences with the production of that book?
Yeah, there, and I'll tell you, this new book that we have, the first two books were really about sharing other people's stories.
Sure.
My voice was almost completely absent. It was a portrait. It was an excerpt from their interview. I realized over the years that after doing this for so long, that I had something I wanted to say too, about encountering difference and taking risks and healing through trauma and all of these things. And so this new one is my story. And as part of that, it is my understanding of some of these themes. And it's hard because everybody has such different wisdom that they bring to it. And that's part of the beauty. But I think my takeaway in this entire far-reaching body of work is three things. And one is a willingness to listen deeply. Just a willingness to take that time, invest that energy to build relationship and listen deeply in conversation. The second is a willingness to challenge our own expectations. We all have biases, we all have preconceived notions, and they're really easy to spot in other people, and they're a little harder to recognize in ourselves. But that willingness to recognize the subtlety and complexity of these issues that are swirling around us today is key to being able to understand and move forward. And the third one, and I hear these themes in so many of the stories, the third one is to just continue showing up, to just make a commitment to remain engaged and stay at the table and stay in community and relationship with people. All of these problems that we're dealing with as a country, if you're talking about race, if you're talking about immigration or climate change or housing security or whatever it is, these are all long-term challenges. These are all things that are going to require us to stay engaged and stay connected, to look for those solutions. And so that third answer is to just stay at the table, keep showing up.
I think that's really brilliant. The point that I latched onto, I believe all three of those coexist simultaneously at the same time in a way that does make them all equally important. But the one that I think I took away the most, that's something that I think people could really take some time to just breathe and comprehend on, is nuance. The second point you made about each of these topics is so vivid, and there isn't just one right and one wrong, or one or two rights, and if you don't believe one of those two, there's so much nuance involved in every single little intricacy of the fabric that is a society and the world that we live in, that you can't just think broadly on a topic. You have to be willing to push and have those open discussions in that regard. I wanted to ask, maybe as we are sort of bridging and getting closer to the end of our time here, I want to go into some more just personal principles and intrinsic based questions. And the first of those I have for you is, what do you define as happiness?
Oh, man. I should have thought about that before you asked. What do I define as happiness? I would say a willingness to quiet the external noise of the world enough that you can hear your inner voice, and a willingness to authentically follow that.
I like that. That's new. I have yet to hear that. And
I like that too. That's the first time I've said that, Chad.
See, well, we learn something new every day, and we spawn some new idea every day. That's
Yeah,
the
for
beautiful
sure.
thing about existence.
Thank you for asking the question.
Of course. Yeah, I wanted to ask too, what do you define as the meaning of life?
I would just have to say connection, whether that is relationship of family or individual humans, crafting your beloved community around you. It can be rooted in faith. It can be rooted in civics. It can be rooted in passion, whatever that is. I think, although we're individual beings, our purpose is connection. And we have to each individually figure out exactly what that means. But even the introverts in my world, myself sometimes being one of them, crave connection of sorts. And I think it's our purpose is finding that connection.
That's probably one of the first times I've heard someone that I like. It was vague enough that it completely made sense, if that makes sense. Like, I agree with you, because for me, you said connection, and I would say at 22 right now, like, I'm focused on connecting with the earth. Like, for me, connecting with a new seedling, right? For example, all the trees in my property are of age. They're all mature, so they're all falling, but they're all falling at the same time. So I'm going out and I'm tagging new saplings, and just having the opportunity to connect and know that I won't be alive when this tree finally gets to its full height, but knowing that I've connected with this earth and I'm doing whatever I can to positively impact what I also get from it's something that drives me even more. And so, that is it's almost, like I said, vague enough to the point where you assign it your own meaning in a regard that it does allow for the meaning of life to become whatever it is. That's new for me. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, well, and you opened a whole new can of worms in that my wife and I also own a Christmas tree farm in Western Wisconsin.
No kidding.
So your talk about trees, we've always, well, we believed that the tree farm is our three-dimensional art project that we get to work on. We're sometimes more concerned about aesthetics than we are about profitability.
Sure.
But also the saying that planting trees is an exercise in hope for the future, because you're doing it for somebody else.
Yep. Entirely.
Yeah.
I've never heard someone say it that way. Yeah. And that's something too, is like gardening for me, and horticulture in general. It's something that like I'm just now bringing on as a passion and a hobby in my life. And it's always been there, but it was in the form of hiking. And then it was in the form of field ecology and biology and understanding the mechanisms. But now it's more about the opportunity of creating and spawning and being a part of, like, I'm noticing in every aspect, like when I create philosophy in my life or when I think about the world, I do it in a very what is that called? When you mimic your biomimicry. It's the study
Oh,
of our surroundings in a way that allows us to make learnings of our life. So, for example, like knowing that certain ant hills in Africa, if you cut it open and you look at the way they build their tunnels, they've built a natural ventilation system. And how do they know to do that? It's just written in their biology. And so, if we can
right.
observe that, we can build our buildings to match similar architectural styles to make them more eco-friendly, to make them cooler for us, to make it easier to live. And I just sort of took that same concept of biomimicry and I apply it to philosophy, I apply it to life principles, I apply it to everything. And I guess where I was getting at with that is it's sort of that, it's, I don't know, it's like that deeper willingness to just listen and observe and communicate. It's fascinating. Yeah.
Well, and to maybe realize that you don't need to be at the center of everything, and that perhaps we're part of something that's larger than ourselves. And there's a lot of humility and grace and learning that happens in that process.
Mm. I have one final question for you before our time's up here. And before I even get to that, I just want to say, John, thank you so much for all of your wisdom, your time today, and your transparent willingness to be so open and so deep with me and just connect on such intimate conversations, especially when it does relate around creating an art. And that is as much as it is about highlighting the experience of others, which is something that very much drives why I like this show and why I love doing it and why I get so inspired by it. It's been so unique to get the opportunity to just delve into your brain and to sort of understand the artist behind making this happen. And it's something that I could advocate and completely get behind, is the ability to open up further discussion and to push our willingness and our ability to look at the world and to connect as a community in general. And so I just wanted to say, first and foremost, thank you for that. But then my question is, what if you had one final piece of wisdom you had to leave for someone listening to this episode, what would that be for you?
One parting bit of wisdom, I think, would be to be willing to be vulnerable. I think we go through life very often trying to protect ourselves from being hurt, trying to protect ourselves from feeling foolish, trying to protect ourselves. But in the process, we put up these walls and build this shell that at the same time it protects us, it also insulates us from the best things about being human. It insulates us from those deep connections that we could make. And I think it's an inadvertent and unfortunate side benefit of trying to protect ourselves. But I think I have a long history of exposing myself to risk, of being vulnerable, and have found almost universally that when I go ahead and do that, when I step into that space that feels a little scary, that feels a little bit raw, that feels a little maybe even foolish, that there are good things that develop, that there is a rich reward for that. And so I think maybe this is one of the benefits of age, is that you start to see that pattern. You start to say, okay, I made myself vulnerable, and you know what? That worked out. I was richer for it. I was more engaged. I was more connected for it. And so it starts to be less scary to do that when you have examples that play out well. Also, the opposite can happen. Sometimes we do make ourselves vulnerable and we wind up getting wounded in the process, but that is a price that we have to pay if we also want to make those deep connections. One of the people I interviewed, am I going to remember his name right now? Mel Duncan runs an organization called Nonviolent Peace Force, and he talks about all of the difficult things he's seen around the world But he said we have to open ourselves up to letting our hearts being broken again and again and again, because it's those cracks that the light can come in. It's those cracks where the compassion can grow for the deep humanity that's all around us. And I believe that's true.
Holy cow. I liked that. I really like that one. I'm going to contemplate on that one a little bit after the fact. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with us. I want to give you an opportunity before we finish up here. Plug anything you want to plug. Where can people find you? What could they purchase? How can they interact with your content or you in general?
Yeah, the website for the project is apieceofmymind.net. It's spelled PEACE, that kind of piece. You can also just use the acronym if you don't want to type so many letters, APOMM.net. You can learn all about our programming there. We're constantly posting new stories, sharing new content, and that will link you to all of our social media. Our biggest deal that we have going on is September 21st, we release our new book, Portraits of Peace, Searching for Hope in a Divided America. A lot of these stories that I shared with you today, including that last one of Mel Duncan, those are things that I've shared in this narrative, in this book. This is going to be available anywhere you buy books. You can go to the big box stores. I'd encourage people to walk down to your independent bookstore, just ask for it there. If they don't have it, they can get it. Yep. And I think the world is ready for this book at this very moment. We just have to let them know about it.
Okay. I hear you. I can't wait to pick up my own copy myself. And folks, thank you for joining us. This has been a fantastic episode. John, thank you so much for being on and being a guest. And I look forward to the opportunity that people have to listen to this. As always, folks, enjoy life, keep working hard, and love life. We'll see you later. Peace.